everybody. So we are talking about the civil rights movement today. So yesterday we had left off talking about Martin Luther King Jr. All right. So he is very much a catalyst for this civil rights movement. So the Brown versus Board of Education happened in 1954. Rosa Parks gets arrested in 1955. Montgomery, Alabama decides to pick a battle with the buses. Martin Luther King Jr., who was in the area, encouraged the local population to commit to the boycott. He gets arrested. It becomes a big national thing, but it's a huge win for black people in the South. All right, because the buses were forced to change their laws in order to get people to ride it, because without black people riding the buses, there is no way that they can make money. Now, this movement is going to spread, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about the different versions of it. The main tentpole of the civil rights movement that we'll discuss here, the one that ends up getting all the results that we still see today, is going to be the method that Martin Luther King Jr. here is going to perpetuate. That is a non-violent way. So Martin Luther King Jr., devout Christian, he sees the way Gandhi had done in the 1920s and 1930s in India. Is very much a non-violent mentality. Now, Martin Luther King Jr., he's going to take marches, all right? And what he's going to do is he is going to point out to the rest of the country what it's like being black and trying to use your constitutional rights. So when they go for a march, he knows that the local population, the police, the fire departments are going to freak out. They're going to show up. They're going to use water hoses on them, like from the fire trucks, which can seriously injure you. Police get attacked with police dogs, all types of stuff, just purely for having a march because they're black. Now, the reason, what he does, and this is he's very adamant about this. He says, look, if you're going to march with us, understand you're going to be attacked. They're going to call you all the bad words you've ever heard of, right? There's going to be people that come up and punch you square in the face because of the color of your skin. Now, and this is what's really interesting with Martin Luther King Jr., as far as he's very aware of this, and he clarifies this over and over. He says, look, if you can't get punched in the face and stand back up and look at the person that just punched you in the face and say, I love you, if you can't do that, don't march with us, all right? Because there's a lot of people that won't change. But if somebody comes and hits you, you want to fight them back. And Martin Luther King Jr. is like, no. We are not fighting back. We're going to let them beat us. We're going to do the right thing. We're not going to fight back. And again, he's a Christian, so he's going to say, look, Jesus wasn't going to fight back. He was going to do the right thing, and moral superiority will win out at the end. So he says, if you can't get punched in the face and not retaliate, don't get in the line. Meaning, don't march with us. He's like, now, I'm not saying get out of the movement. There are some people just don't have that in them where they can not respond. He was like, there's so many other things you can do in this movement. You can go door to door. You can set up different type of charities. There's all types of stuff that you can do in the civil rights movement that does not involve marching. So he is very strict on this non-violent thing, because here's the purpose. Is when you show up and you're going to march, all right? And the thing is the video cameras will be there now. It'll be all over the news. If white people show up and attack black people, and then black people fight back, all of a sudden you just got a fight between black people and white people. And the rest of the world's going to see that, and the rest of America is going to see that and be like, well, that's why they segregate, because those two races can't get along, all right? Martin Luther King Jr. knows that. So he's like, do not fight back. If they attack you, don't fight back. So, and that's what happens. So when the white people show up and they're attacking the black people, and the black people aren't fighting back, when the rest of the country, which is predominantly white, sees this, who's the bad guy? It's the white people. They're just attacking these people for no reason. And they're like, wait, why are they doing that? And they start understanding the racism that's taking place in the South. It is very important not to fight back in Martin Luther King Jr.'s mind. And so he's the biggest tentpole, and he's going to get a lot of success out of his nonviolent campaign. There are other people we're going to talk about today that took a much more aggressive approach. And while they're famous and all that, a lot of the long-term solutions to the civil rights movement came from Martin Luther King Jr. And it's really impressive on what he is able to do and the movement he is able to lead. So while he has a whole nonviolent mentality, the most famous way of using nonviolence to show how wrong his laws are going to be sit-ins. Now, it is important to point out that Martin Luther King Jr. doesn't invent the sit-ins. This other group does it, and when that happens, he supports it. All right, he's like, oh, that's a really good idea. So he doesn't invent it, but there are other people who take his nonviolent ideas and put them out there. So in Shaw University, which is in Raleigh, North Carolina, it's down the street. It's at the time it was an all-black school. Now it's a historically black college. They have a student version. It's called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they're called SNCC. It's SNCC, but it's called SNCC. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They're the ones who come up with the sit-ins. It's extremely effective, like wildly effective. So what happens is they are going to choose. So it's black students. It's a handful of black students. They are going to choose to go to a Woolworth store and sit at the lunch counter and ask to eat lunch. Now, here's where all of this makes sense. So, have y'all ever heard of a Woolworths? Wool, W-O-O-L, Worth, W-O-R-T-H, apostrophe S, Woolworths. You may not have, because they're pretty much going to go out of business because this makes them extremely unpopular. It's like Walmart. Man, I don't know the Davie County Walmart real well. When I used to teach this, there used to be, I think there's a Subway. I think there's a Subway in the Davie County Walmart. Oh man, if I'm wrong on that, I'm going to feel silly because I'm just going to run with that. There is a McDonald's in the one I used to reference that everybody knew back when I was in Lexington. So I think there's a Subway in Davie County Walmart. If there's not, and I'm messing that up, just go with me and pretend like there is. Where you can go get a Subway sandwich and you can eat there or you can get it to go. Well, so Woolworths was like the Walmart at the time, just a big old department store. And Woolworths had their own diner inside their store, all right? Just like Walmart in Davie County has a Subway inside their store. The rule was, all right, now every major city had a Woolworths, all right, all around the country, just like Walmart. So you could, if you could go to the Woolworths, shop, stop, eat, and leave. Right, it's open to everybody. However, in the South, and only in the South, the Woolworth stores in the South, if you're black, you can't eat at the diner. You can get stuff to go, but you can't eat at the diner. All right, this only applies to Woolworths in the South, because anywhere else in the country you can be black and go sit at a Woolworths is not an issue. But only in the South do they have these rules. So it would be like going to the Subway in Walmart, and if you're a certain color they don't want you to eat there, you could get your sub to go, but you couldn't sit there in their little restaurant area and eat. All right, so it's just a really random one of the many segregation laws. Well, this group of nonviolent from the Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, from Shaw University are going to challenge this in Greensboro, North Carolina, right up the road. All right, so in Greensboro, North Carolina, there is a Woolworths. Now, there is a very specific reason why they're going to choose to do the Woolworths in Greensboro and not one in New York City and not one down in Mississippi. All right. The reason is because if they did it in New York City, would anybody care? No, because there's no laws against black people sitting at the Woolworths in New York City. Why don't they do it down in Mississippi? Because at this point, like, the Klan is out. You could get lynched. You could get murdered from this. You do it in North Carolina where all these laws exist, you get the reaction these kids get without, in theory, as much of a threat to your actual life. So here's what happens in the 1950s, starting at Woolworths. So it starts here at the Woolworths, is a very famous place, even to present day, where this takes place, and it spreads. So these guys start it and it takes off. So what they do is they show up at Woolworths and they go in, they sit down at the counter. And the lady working the counter is like, hey, yeah, y'all can't sit here. Black people can't sit here. And they're like, no, we would like to be served. And they're like, nah, you can't do that. That's not a thing. And they said, well, we're not going to leave until we're served. I think the lady actually quits that's working there because she realizes that this is going to get crazy. So they sit at the counter. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Walmart before. All right. A lot of crazy people that are there. This is the people who go to Woolworths as well at the time. So most normal people are going to just walk past this because I believe the diner's right by the front door. Most normal people are going to walk by. The people that are going to stop are going to be the people that are looking for problems. That are your racist, your extremist. So it doesn't take long that these group of guys, and it's just guys at the very first one, are surrounded by an angry white mob of why these guys are sitting here. They start cussing at them. They start yelling at them. They start spitting on them. They start punching them. They start taking cigarettes and putting it out in the back of their heads. They would like hit them as hard as they can, knock them on the floor. And the students from Shaw University will get right back up and sit back down at the table, not fight back. And they'll say, I'm not going to leave until I'm served. And they get the living crap beat out of them. Finally, the police show up. Oh, thank goodness. And they're arrested. The students are the ones that are arrested and taken to jail because they're the ones that broke the law. Even though they've been getting beat up, had cigarettes put out on them, had people spit in their face, the black students are the ones that get arrested. Now, all of that was on video camera because the news showed up because they let them know in advance they were going to do this. And the media videos all of it. It goes on worldwide TV. Really, the nation's the only one that's really going to care about it, but nationwide TV. And everybody, like in Montana, California, New York City, white people who are just oblivious to this whole thing, they're like, oh, what? What is that's in North Carolina? What? And it horrifies people that this can be happening inside the United States. To citizens of the United States, people were oblivious. They knew it was segregated. They never really thought about it, but they're like, oh, this is what happens when they don't want to be segregated anymore. It's going to start making the white people the bad guys to other white people. It is an extremely effective strategy here with these nonviolent sit-ins. So Woolworths becomes extremely unpopular because of this. Woolworths, in large part because of this, is going to go under eventually. Today, the Woolworths store, and you may not have ever done it, have ever been there, the Woolworths store in Greensboro is no longer a store. It is now the Civil Rights Museum. Like the nationwide Civil Rights Museum is in Greensboro, North Carolina. And while the building has been redone, it's a steel frame. Like the counter where this was at has been like glassed off so you can still see it. It's really cool. But yeah, so this Woolworths store that we're talking about is now the National Civil Rights Museum, and it's in Greensboro, right down the road. So these sit-ins, a Woolworths store in Greensboro, North Carolina. I got a video here of the sit-ins. This is actually a photograph of the men before it got crazy at the very first sit-in. These guys, I want to say all three of them are still alive. I could be wrong. I could be wrong with that. I know at least one of them is because they still do interviews with them. All right, so this gets taken to another level. So the federal government comes out and they say, all right, we're going to jump in on this. Civil rights is bad. They're like, so after the Montgomery bus boycott thing, and they change it in Montgomery, the federal government makes a rule. Anybody using federal roads can't segregate. It's not a thing that can happen. And so the federal government's like, we have said it. Must be true. So in theory, if you're taking a bus and you're on the interstate highway, segregation is illegal on those buses since you're on federal roads. All right. So the federal government's like, I'm sure everybody would be good with this. Well, here's what happens. If you're in Mississippi and you're black and you get on a bus that's on the interstate highway, you go sit in the back because you know that the white people there are like, nah, the federal government can say that, but here's how it's really going to be, boy. Like, it's crazy. So while the federal government says this, that they have banned segregation on buses, it was still practiced in the South, blatantly illegally. So a group of students, and they're called Freedom Riders. A lot of these take place with college students at the time. So these college students, what they're going to do is they're going to charter buses. They're going to rent buses, and it's white students and black students. And they're going to travel through the South, taunting the South. They're on, federal roads. They're taunting the South and be like, we're not segregated, nothing you can do about it because it's against the law, knowing the South is going to freak out. The whole point of this is trying to prove to the federal government, you can't just say something to the South and expect them to do it. You actually have to go enforce it. So the Freedom Riders, after the Supreme Court says it's illegal to segregate based on race on federal roads, a large group of students that they're core members, Congress of Racial Equality, white students and black students, they are going to ride through the South, telling the South we're coming through and there's nothing you can do about it because we're not going to segregate on this bus. And so what happens, it's absolutely crazy. They were expecting this. Nobody dies. I do want to point, nobody dies here, but it was bad. So they're like going down the interstate highway, and then all of a sudden the entire interstate is blocked with like a horde of people, like a zombie horde, it looks like. And they stop these buses on the middle of the road, pull everybody off, beat the living bejesus out of them, black people and white people, beat the living bejesus out of them, and then set their bus on fire. All right. This is a picture of some of the Freedom Riders. This is the next morning, because this happened at night. This is the next morning. See these guys here in the suits and ties? That's the FBI. The FBI, all right, shows up in the South, coming from Washington, D.C. They show up in the South before the local police do, because the local police just never show up. They just don't. In large part, probably because some of the people, or a lot of the people that were involved in this were probably the local police that don't see anything wrong with this. And this is crazy. So at this time, we're going to talk about JFK. We're going to spend plenty of time talking about him. So JFK comes out, and he's the president at the time. And a game changer to him was when the media goes and interviews the sheriff of this town. And this is crazy. When they interview the sheriff of this town, they're like, hey, why did the police never show up? And the sheriff's like, I didn't think they needed to. And they're like, so you purposely said they didn't have to show up? He said, yeah. And he's like, and the media's like, why would you not go help out the Freedom Riders? And this dude on national TV says, because I think those N-words got what they deserved. He doesn't say N-words, all right? He says the with the hard R. And everybody's like, what? Like, even at that time, you're like, whoa. Like, this is the sheriff. They're supposed to keep people safe. JFK, when he saw that on the news, just says, oh, I can't think what, doesn't matter. I don't know the sheriff's name. I think he's in the orange EOC book that you'll see. He makes the statement, he sees that on the news like, whoa. I think that sheriff just did more to help black people than any other white person since Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. And now JFK saying this super racist sheriff just did more to help black people than any other white person since Abraham Lincoln. Why is that? Well, everybody realizes this is a problem now. When your sheriff is dropping the N-word on nonviolent people who got attacked, like, the rest of the country's like, nah, like, this is a serious, like, people start realizing after the Freedom Riders that this gets crazy. And the country starts rallying around, slowly, the plight that black people are dealing with in the South. All right. Then the story of James Meredith. So this is awesome. James Meredith fought in World War II. He was a distinguished fighter pilot, all right? He'd grown up in Mississippi. When he got out of the military, he wanted to go to college, right? Well, he had a GI Bill, pays for it, so he can go wherever he wants. He's a 4.0 student. He's a genius in high school, so he'd been in the military. He's an officer. He's all those. He's a distinguished fighter pilot, and he's like, I want to go to Ole Miss. So he gets an application to go to Ole Miss, his local college. He fills out the application, doesn't lie on it at all, turn it in. Ole Miss is like, whoa, 4.0 high school student, fighter pilot in World War II. This is paid for, so you know he's good on the money. Let them in, absolutely. So they send him this letter. Absolutely, you're so glad you're coming. We love you. That's great. James Meredith shows up on the first day of class at Ole Miss University, and the place goes ballistic. Because Ole Miss is an all-white university. James Meredith is black. Black people aren't allowed at Ole Miss. Now, you're like, well, then how do you fill out the application? Because the application never asks you what your race is, because they fully expect that only white people will apply. They also assume, since he was a fighter pilot and had combat experience, he's not black, because only white people do that, because they didn't, whatever. So they let James Meredith in. And then they kick him out and says, no, because you're black. James Meredith is going to sue the school. It's like, no. And here's why he's going to win hands down. He can claim the only reason they're not letting me in is because I'm black, which is 100% true. Had they turned him down when they knew he was black, they'd be like, oh, well, we had so many other students with a 4.2 GPA. Like, they could say whatever they wanted, but they've already accepted him. The only thing that has changed is the fact they just now figured out that he's black. So they try to kick him out. The Supreme Court is going to rule, nah, Ole Miss is paid for by taxpayer money. Taxpayer money that black people pay into. You can't have a public institution like Ole Miss University that's paid for in part with taxpayer money and not let some of the citizens go. So you have to let James Meredith in. The governor of Mississippi at the time, all right, is a guy named Governor Ross Barnett, all right. Ross Barnett says, hey, the rest of the students here at Ole Miss, I expect y'all to burn this place to the ground before we let this N-word show up. Again, using not the N-word, the actual word with the hard R. And he says, burn it to the ground. Burn it to the ground before we let this happen. And when the military shows up, because it's almost like the Little Rock Nine, they show up with James Meredith. I got a picture here of James Meredith. Got a cool video clip of this as well. This is Ross Barnett with his Confederate flag. And this is James Meredith coming in with his Secret Service. So when they try to bring him into class, there are riots and had to close the school for a while for people trying to burn the school down. And finally, James Meredith shows up. He goes all 4 years. He gets a degree from Ole Miss University. Here's what's crazy. Present day, they have a big old statue of James Meredith out there now, and Ole Miss is like, look, we're like the leaders in integration. We're the first school to be integrated in the South. Look how progressive we are. I'm like, Ole Miss, man, y'all tried to burn the place down when that happened. So I don't know how much you can claim, how much more advanced you were than other schools but I guess they were the first one to let black people in. Required. So I got a video clip of this is what the stuff that was taking place at Ole Miss when James Meredith comes in.
James H. Meredith is formally enrolled at the University of Mississippi, ending one chapter in the federal government's efforts to desegregate the university. The town of Oxford is an armed camp, following riots that accompany the registration of the first Negro in the university's 118-year history. Much of this film record was destroyed when our cameraman, Gordon Yoder, was attacked, but he did salvage pictures of Governor Ross Barnett at the scene. The governor fought the court order long and bitterly before modifying his stand, saying Mississippi was overpowered by the federal government. President Kennedy appealed to the students and to the people of the state to comply peacefully with the law and bring the crisis to an end. Even as he talked, riots were breaking out in Oxford. Nearly 6,000 troops patrol Oxford to maintain order, and arrests mount to more than 200 as smaller disturbances erupt the next day.
That's just a guy trying to go to class, man. And again, it's wild. So I probably just jumped up here on your screen real quick. Sorry about that. I was like mid-talk. And hey, here's Mr. Wagstaff. We're going to end today's class right here. When I recorded this, I got carried away. And it's like an hour long. And I'm not going to make you do a lesson for an hour solid because that's tough for anybody. So we're going to stop it right here. And tomorrow we're going to pick up from right here because, man, I've been killing it today. All right, so you guys go complete the next part of today. And see y'all tomorrow.